Welcome back to this introductory course on Coordinated Needs Assessment. Humanitarian Needs Assessment is not a one-off event but continues in a cycle. The cycle is iterative, meaning that each assessment should build on previous assessments, since the information required becomes more detailed, sector-specific and long-term as the response develops. Let's go through the various steps of the cycle. During preparedness, make sure your organization has assessment procedures that fit with its contingency plans and program planning. The plan should explain how your organization will carry out the assessment from start to finish, what the different parts of the organization are responsible for, and how it will balance cost, speed, and quality. Then, identify, check, and be ready to mobilize staff and other resources that you will need to implement the assessment. A review of secondary data may only need 1 or 2 people and can often be done by staff outside the affected area. Primary data collection will need more staff, support and funding. Make sure you know how to get an assessment started in your organization. Is there a formal process, or does it only need informal approval from a senior manager? How you mobilize resources will depend on your organization and your position in it, but you will need senior management support to secure those resources and to establish procedures in advance, for example by recruiting or seconding staff to the assessment teams. You may need to persuade senior managers that it's important to be prepared for an assessment. You can do this by emphasizing that it's more cost-effective to prepare in advance and take part in coordinated efforts. Seek out and identify other organizations you can cooperate with and make plans for coordinated assessments. A lot can be achieved by collecting baseline secondary data on vulnerabilities and capacities early and creating the necessary links to collect in-crisis secondary data if needed. This information can also be shared in a coordination forum, as most will find it useful. There is no single methodology for an assessment that meets every information need in every situation. However, to provide decision makers with good enough information at the appropriate time and to enable them to make informed decisions, an assessment should include information about 3 key elements: the locations where the impact has been greatest and/or is likely to be greatest, the groups most in need of humanitarian assistance and/or most vulnerable, and the sector that require immediate action and/or ongoing attention. Every assessment should be designed to enable the organization to make specific decisions. The following flowchart will help you determine the objectives of the assessment and choose the most appropriate methodology. It is perfectly possible to analyze the situation and report on it, basing it only on a secondary data review. However, we will also have to ask ourselves whether we have access to the affected areas. If not, we have to look at other possible avenues of collecting data, do our analysis and reporting. If we have access, we need to look at the balance between time, cost and resources available and design our field assessment accordingly before we make our final reporting. In regards to the type of assessment and level of detail required, affected population figures and data collection technique, here is a summary of the different possibilities. When you implement your assessment, use a standardized, transparent and clearly documented process, terms of reference, methodology or standard operating procedures. You should follow recognized data collection methods like key informant interviews, direct observation, and use widely accepted terms from the humanitarian sector, and also apply relevant technical standards and indicators. This will enable others to assess the credibility and reliability of your findings and make it possible to compare those findings with other assessments. Within an assessment team, there should ideally be an assessment coordinator and information analyst. The number and type of other profiles will depend on the objectives and scope of the assessment, the type of information sources, the resources available, and the agreed approach for collecting data. For example, you may or may not need field team leaders, drivers, interpreters, pilots, and subject specialists. GIS specialists are necessary if you want to include maps in your final products. Administration and logistical support will be necessary if you have a large geographical area to assess. Special considerations when you build an assessment team relate to the type of expertise you need, the inclusion of national authorities and national staff, the age or ethnicity of team members, gender balance, language knowledge and experience. A one-size-fits-all approach is impossible to prescribe, but the overall quality of the assessment will be dependent on the dedication of appropriate skilled human resources. Your assessment team is your most important resource, because the trustworthiness of the results depends on the quality of the team. The more qualified and experienced an assessment team is, the more accurate and reliable the assessment findings will be. Choose team members who have the skills and experience you require to respond to this particular disaster, and make the skills and competencies complement each other. Appropriate language skills are always a key factor. Just like a good football team, the assessment team should be trained in the methodology, tools, and how to work together before the data collection starts. If possible, team members should be recruited specifically for the assessment, or existing staff seconded to the team. It becomes very difficult if staff are seconded to the assessment process, but still expected to carry out their own agency-specific work. This is not to be advised. Working in an assessment team requires full-time work and focus. In addition, consider the following. Women and men, especially in geographical areas where access to women is restricted for men. Ethnicity and religion, especially where inter-ethnic or inter-religious conflict has occurred. Age, especially in locations where older persons will be more accessible to other older persons. Organization, social and technical background that will minimize bias by mandate or sector. National and international staff to ensure nothing is missed, misinterpreted, overemphasized or misrepresented. Analysis involves combining, manipulating and interpreting available information. Analysis begins by comparing data from different locations and groups to identify similarities and differences. This beginning can help you understand how the situation has developed and will develop. Identifying, contrasting and comparing these characteristics make it possible to prioritize groups, locations and sectors, leading to recommendations for response. Analysis should start as soon as you begin to receive data, be it secondary or primary, and continue as long as you are receiving new data. Analysis aims at identifying issues or risks and providing recommendations based on their importance and impact. Analysis benefits from a range of perspectives from different genders, age, ethnicities, so every staff member can contribute, starting with the assessment team. Involving different stakeholders ensure that the participants discuss the finding and, as far as possible, agree on key priorities. When analyzing assessment data, the aim is to provide information about the following. Problems or risks that we identify. These can fall into three categories: current, future, or potential. The identification of current problems leads to identification of key priorities and short-term to longer-term recommendations. Future problems, for example winter coming in 2 months, lead to early warning and preparedness measures. Potential threats or risks can be the basis for developing scenarios and proposing contingency measures. Problems or risks that are not identified is another category of analysis and requires special attention. These can be the result of non-existent problems or problems that have not yet been measured. Non-existent problems are problems that have not occurred or that sometimes, surprisingly, are not present in the assessed context, in which case there is a need to advocate that no response is necessary. Not known problems are the known unknowns, resulting in information gaps. Further assessment is needed to fill the gaps and should be part of the recommendations. Remember that no data is different from no problem. In situation reports, more emphasis is always given to the problematic information than no problem. Analysis and interpretation inform us about the big problems, but too often assessments fail to report future or potential problems, and quite systematically they forget to report non-existing problems. For example, no, there is no need for books or school building materials, or no need to send more in the southern affected provinces. Joint analysis is carried out to deal with uncertainty. Uncertainty is high in humanitarian assessments. We need to be transparent about our findings, how we found them, and why we think they are as close to the truth as possible. In the humanitarian sector, we balance the lack of information with a level of agreement between experts. More minds think better than one, and by analyzing the available information together, limited as it may be, we may reach a level of consensus over what the information means. This may add considerable weight to the conclusions, and the outcome will in fact become larger than the sum of the data. This approach is used in other areas with lack of complete information, for example the International Climate Change Panel of Experts. You will usually be expected to present your findings in an assessment report. The report should, as a minimum, include 3 major components. 1. Findings, including background context. 2. Analysis of those findings to explain what is happening. And 3. Methodology of how you collected the data and carried out the analysis. Make your reports as user-friendly as possible. Shorter documents are more likely to be read. Write as little as possible, but as much as you need to communicate your findings. A written assessment report is not the only way to communicate your findings. You may need to create other products, such as briefing notes and slide presentations, and different users require different levels of detail in different formats. You should present your analysis in a form that meets the expectations and requirements of the target audience. Reports and maps are various ways of presenting your findings. This can be combined with graphs and matrices to further visualize the analyzed assessment results and enhance comprehension. If feasible, make the information available online as soon as possible. Time to read a bit again. Look up these 2 assessment reports entitled Syria Multisectoral Needs Assessments and HCTT Phase 1 Joint Needs Assessment in Bola, Barguna and Patuakhali districts, Bangladesh. Read only the methodology sections and have a look at how the data was collected and how stakeholders were involved in the assessments.